The second season of Kazuya's story begins, and the former king is talking with his wife, telling her that everything is peaceful and that Kazuya and their daughter are away. She replies that despite the calm atmosphere, all the people and ministers are working tirelessly. The king answers that the hardest working person among them is Kazuya, and that giving up the throne to him was never a mistake. The next day, Kazuya trains with Aisha Udgard, but she is far stronger than him and easily defeats both him and his combat puppet. During the training, Kazuya thinks about creating a group of puppets to act as an adventurer party. Aisha tells him that such a party would also need a mage, making him wonder how he could learn magic and use basic spells and barrier magic. However, Licia Elfrieden explains that it is impossible because she has never seen anyone use magic outside their own specialty. She also tells him that only 3 people belong to his rare magic type, and one of them is her mother. After that, Hakuya Kwanmin asks to speak with Kazuya about the Empire, as 50,000 soldiers are about to reach Van City. When they meet, Hakuya surprises him with a complete development plan for the city. As soon as Kazuya finishes reading the proposal, he says Hakuya is aiming too high and that carrying out all those projects would be harder than rebuilding the city from scratch. Hakuya apologizes, explaining that the city's poor layout made it impossible for him to ignore its problems, so he naturally focused on reorganizing it. He explains that dividing the city into proper districts would be necessary to prevent fires and solve many other issues. Kazuya agrees, but says the remaining decisions should be made together with the citizens because they are the ones who will live there. He wants them to choose the kind of city they want, so there will not be any negative reactions later. Hakuya then says the city's current atmosphere makes it perfect to become a center for modern arts. Kazuya likes the idea, but Hakuya reminds him that Van is the face of Amadonia, so he does not recommend giving it that image. Licia Elfrieden joins the discussion and says all they really need is to make the city more comfortable to live in while keeping its role as a military center. Kazuya agrees and asks Hakuya to prepare a new plan that achieves both goals. Junadoma then asks whether developing the city should really be their priority, since they will have to spend the kingdom's savings. Kazuya answers that it is necessary because Van's economy is stagnant, and they must create jobs for the soldiers who have lost their work. Later, Kazuya asks Ludwin about the transportation network. Ludwin reports that the main roads are already complete, work has also begun on the smaller roads, and several bridges have been built. He says he understands how important supply routes are, but wonders whether all that effort will be wasted if they return the land to its former owners. Licia Elfrieden agrees, pointing out that Julius and his soldiers would also benefit from those bridges if they regained the city. However, Hakuya interrupts and says that even if Julius returned to power, he would never allow himself to use facilities built by the kingdom because it would hurt his pride. That gives Kazuya a clever idea. He suggests writing their names on every bridge they build, such as Bridge, Lycia Bridge, Albert Bridge, and many others. Hakuya immediately understands his intention and explains that even if Amadonia takes the land back, everyone will know those bridges were built by the Kingdom of Friedonia. If they decide to destroy them, the people will lose their benefits, so everyone agrees to carry out the plan. After the meeting ends, Licia Elfrieden tells Kazuya that it will now be much harder for the Empress's lapdog to reclaim Van. Kazuya replies that he will never abandon his political principles, but he is still unsure whether he can outmaneuver Jean Euphoria. He also does not want to appear hostile because that would be considered a diplomatic failure. Licia then asks whether summoning the hero like this is really their idea of kindness toward a king. Kazuya says yes and explains that when he heard Empress Maria Euphoria was known as the Saint, he assumed she would never do anything cruel or underhanded. Licia Elfrieden is surprised that he relied on nothing more than a title. Kazuya explains that titles are given because they reflect the people who carry them, and that people naturally follow a saint just as they follow a leader. Humans always need someone to unite behind. He adds that after meeting Jean Euphoria, he understood the situation better. The Grand Empire is powerful, but it is doing everything it can to maintain its influence. Because of that, he must stay prepared and never underestimate such a powerful opponent. Meanwhile, Hakuya Kwanmin enters again and informs Kazuya that Grand's forces have arrived together with Amadonia's negotiation delegation. On October 21, 1546, according to the continental calendar, 50,000 soldiers from the Grand Empire camped one day's march from Van City. Their commander was Jean Euphoria, accompanied by Julius Amadonia, the son of Gaius VIII, who had once occupied Van City and now serves as the Prince of Amadonia. The two had joined forces to enter Van City. Jean Euphoria is surprised when she meets Kazuya and says she never expected the situation to be this peaceful. She thought he would be surrounded by a huge army. Kazuya replies that things are not as comfortable as they appear. Jean praises his wisdom and hospitality, but Kazuya jokes that he is nothing compared to an empress who lost a war and quickly returned to reclaim the land she had lost. Julius becomes furious, but Jean calms him down and comments that Aisha Udgard is incredibly strong. Kazuya then asks if she is not worried about her life while inside the city. She replies that she came as a peace envoy, so she has nothing to fear. After that, they begin the negotiations. Julius immediately demands that Van City be returned, explaining that the Kingdom of Amadonia is one of the nations that signed the humanitarian treaty, which refuses to recognize any border changes caused by military action. Kazuya says he knows that, but asks whether they themselves have already violated that clause. Julius answers yes because he is now demanding the city's return. Kazuya points out that this is selfish. Amadonia attacked the Kingdom of Fredonia first, yet now they are hiding behind the treaty. Julius argues that the decision to start the war was not his, but his foolish father Gaius's. However, Kazuya reminds him that he fought in that war himself, so he shares the responsibility. Kazuya then adds that before talking about reclaiming territory, shouldn't they first apologize for invading his kingdom? Jean Euphoria agrees and says he is right. Julius is forced to apologize, but immediately claims that Fredonia's forces are now the ones occupying Amadonia's land and once again demands the territory back. Kazuya replies that this is only Julius's personal opinion before asking Jean Euphoria for the Empire's position. She answers that they cannot reject a request made by a country that signed the humanitarian treaty. Kazuya asks if she is requesting that he return every piece of land gained during the war. She answers yes. He calmly replies, "I refuse." Julius is left stunned and angrily accuses him of challenging the entire treaty. However, Kazuya explains that he has no intention of challenging the treaty. Julius becomes even angrier and says that, as a king, it is his duty to free his people from oppression under occupation. Kazuya is surprised by his use of the word free, then asks whether Julius even knows what the people of the city actually want. Julius is caught off guard by the question. Kazuya asks if he looked at the streets of Van City on his way there. Julius gives him a provocative answer, but Kazuya calmly continues and asks what he thought of the city's colors. Julius replies that he saw many colors, but they all had terrible taste. Kazuya then asks him another question. Does he really think that people living under occupation, as Julius described them just moments ago, would want to paint the walls and roofs of their homes with bright, eye-catching colors like the ones he saw? Julius falls silent as Kazuya continues, explaining that the first time he entered Van City, it was covered in gray colors, with a gloomy atmosphere and no unique charm at all. Afterward, Kazuya asks everyone what they think of Van City now that its people are free to paint their houses any color they like. He then turns to Julius and asks which version of the city is better, Van under Fredonia or Van under Amadonia. Enraged, Julius reaches for his sword, while Aisha immediately does the same, but Jean and Kazuya calm both sides before the situation escalates. Jean asks Kazuya to stop provoking Julius, but Kazuya explains that he is simply speaking the truth. A ruler's duty is to protect and support the people during difficult times, whereas rulers who burden their citizens with heavy taxes only to strengthen their armies are nothing more than tyrants. Julius argues that Fredonia is at fault for taking the lands of their ancestors, but Kazuya replies that the Amadonia royal family has always hidden behind that excuse while continuing to harm other nations. At his request, Haikyuu presents a list of Fredonian nobles whom Amadonia secretly persuaded to rebel against the kingdom. Jean is stunned, while Julius falls completely silent. Even then, Kazuya continues criticizing Amadonia's methods until Julius nearly loses control again. Kazuya then asks him to leave the negotiations, explaining that the discussion about Van City will now take place only between himself and Jean. Although Julius protests, Jean sides with Kazuya and orders him to leave, leaving him with no choice but to walk out. As soon as Julius is gone, the atmosphere immediately becomes much friendlier. Jean introduces herself again with a smile, and everyone learns that she and Licia have known each other since childhood. Before the negotiations begin, Kazuya secretly asks Serena to serve Julius their finest wine. Since Julius has a little tolerance for alcohol, Kazuya knows he will soon fall asleep, allowing the banquet to end quickly. Jean laughs at the clever idea before the negotiations continue. After the meeting and banquet conclude, Jean reveals that monster meat is actually edible, and admits she once ate a winged serpent from the demon lord's domain, describing its taste as something between chicken and fish. Curious, Kazuya even asks whether she has tried goblin meat, but Jean refuses because goblins resemble humans too closely. The conversation then shifts to the relationship between demons and monsters. Jean explains that scouts once discovered cooked monster meat, leading many to believe that demons eat monsters. That causes Kazuya to wonder whether demons and monsters are actually different species, much like humans and animals. Since his previous world had no demons, dragons, or demi-humans, he admits that he cannot naturally distinguish between them. Everyone is immediately alarmed by his words. Jean warns that if government officials had heard such a discussion, they would have been forced to silence everyone because those ideas could spark revolutions across the continent. Hakuya explains that many nations would begin treating demi-humans and dragons as demons, leading to discrimination, persecution, and racial conflict between allied kingdoms. Jean also points out that the humanitarian treaty protects minorities only in relations between nations, not from the actions of ordinary people. Realizing how dangerous the subject truly is, Kazuya apologizes for speaking so casually. Jean agrees that humanity still knows far too little about demons and monsters to draw conclusions, and the two decide to continue researching the subject together in the future. Finally, the discussion returns to Van City. Jean insists that the Empire cannot allow national borders to change through military conquest, because it would undermine the humanitarian treaty. Kazuya refuses, arguing that Amadonia started the war, so Fredonia has no reason to return the city. He also points out that forcing them to surrender the territory would only damage the Empire's credibility in the eyes of both the nations that signed the treaty and those that never accepted it. Jean tells him that he is right, so they will demand compensation from Amadonia. Kazuya asks, and if they refuse, will you use military force? Jean replies that she will if the situation requires it, adding that the army she brought could easily wipe out both kingdoms. Kazuya says they do not want another war, then asks, doesn't Amadonia want its territory back? Jean confirms that it does. Kazuya then explains that his kingdom also wants to limit Amadonia's ability to take hostile action against them and make it pay for invading Fredonia. Jean says she understands that, from his point of view, occupying Van City is a fair response. Kazuya confirms it. She then asks, if Amadonia pays compensation, will it be allowed to reclaim its territory? He answers yes. At that moment, Hakuya Kwanmin steps in and warns Kazuya that returning Van would be a bad decision in the long term. The city has the potential to produce enormous wealth and only needs someone to invest in it properly. However, Kazuya explains that returning it would not necessarily be the wrong choice, because the Empire would then achieve its goal of restoring the territory. Jean understands what he means. She says this would send a message to the other nations that an invasion would not lead to permanent territorial loss, but would only force the aggressor to pay compensation. Kazuya smiles, impressed by her intelligence, and tells her that this would also earn the Empire some support from nations that have not signed the treaty. After the discussion ends, Jean tells him that Julius will never accept such a solution. Kazuya replies that he feels no sympathy for him because Julius is responsible for everything that happened. Kazuya then states his final condition: the compensation must be paid in imperial currency. Jean agrees before asking why the Kingdom of Fredonia has not joined the humanitarian treaty. She is about to suggest that the reason is Albert Elfrieden, Licia Elfrieden's father, but Licia interrupts and explains that there was never any real reason. Her father simply never made a final decision about signing because he was naturally indecisive. Jane asks Kazuya to give her a clear reason. He thinks about it and realizes that he cannot answer her at the moment. However, he also knows that he cannot lie because doing so would damage the relationship between his kingdom and the Empire. Because of that, he gives her a diplomatic answer. He says that his kingdom trusts Empress Maria Euphoria's judgment and will support whatever decisions she makes. Jean understands from his answer that he has no intention of signing the treaty, but at the same time, he is asking the Empire to trust him. Kazuya then explains that his kingdom cannot join the treaty right now, but it would like to form a secret bilateral alliance with the Empire. He has already improved the internal situation of his kingdom, but he still needs more time to strengthen and unite his military forces. He then asks Jan whether the Empire is currently sending another force to support the nations in the east. Jan replies that most of those nations are small, but they have signed the treaty, so it is the Empire's duty to support them. Kazuya says that is exactly his point and asks whether they can share that responsibility. He explains that if monsters and demons come from the north, they will avoid the Star Dragon mountain range and move through either the eastern or western front. If they come from the west, the Empire's forces will be waiting for them. If they come from the east, the forces of his kingdom will be ready to face them. Jean pauses and says that such a plan would require many protocols and procedures. Kazuya tells her that he understands, but the Empire can coordinate with the eastern nations while the troops themselves are sent from his kingdom. Those nations would also be asked to keep the matter secret. Hakuya Kwanmin adds that if this alliance becomes public, many nations and kingdoms will feel threatened. Jian accepts the offer but asks what Kazuya hopes to gain from it. He simply replies that he wants to earn the Empire's trust. Jean points out that a great distance separates their kingdom from the Empire. Hakuya then shows her the receiver and asks her to provide them with a similar device. That way, they will be able to communicate easily with Empress Maria Euphoria. Jean is impressed by his intelligence. She then asks everyone to listen and says to Kazuya, "What do you think about returning the throne to Albert Elfrieden and taking you back to the Empire with us? If you agree, we could make you Prime Minister. Better yet, you could marry my sister and become Emperor." Both Licia Elfrieden and Aisha Udgard become furious, and their jealousy immediately flares up, especially Licia's. However, Kazuya calms her down and assures her that he is not going anywhere. He also asks Aisha to return her sword to its sheath. In the end, he refuses Jean's offer. After that, Jean returns to the subject of the alliance and tells him that she cannot make such a decision on her own. Kazuya replies that this is exactly why he brought the receiver, so they can communicate directly. He then suggests establishing an embassy in each country with diplomats from both sides. As it grows late, everyone is forced to end the discussion and prepare to leave. Suddenly, Jean shares an important piece of information. She explains that the being ruling the Demon Lord's domain has followers whose language they cannot understand. However, those followers repeatedly say one word that seems to mean Demon Lord, pronounced as Divalroy. The moment Kazuya hears that name, he suddenly grabs his head and feels as though he has heard it before. He becomes slightly dizzy and goes to his bed to rest. The next day, Kazuya tells Julius what was decided and explains that he must pay compensation before he can reclaim the city. Julius is shocked and goes to protest to Jean, but she tells him that she restored his territory as he requested. Since Amadonia lost the war, he must accept the conditions. Julius refuses to admit defeat and argues that they only lost a single city. Jean replies that if he truly sees it that way, the Empire will withdraw from the conflict between the two kingdoms. She also tells him that even if he fought alone, he would easily be defeated by the kingdom of Fredonia. Julius is frustrated because he knows she is telling the truth, but he still insists that paying compensation would be deeply humiliating. Jean tells him that her sister is displeased with nations that exploit the humanitarian treaty. Because of that, Amadonia must be made an example so the same behavior will not happen again. Julius asks what will happen if he refuses. Jean answers that the Empire will withdraw and officially announce that Amadonia is no longer a signatory to the humanitarian treaty. Julius realizes that he has been trapped. Amadonia is surrounded by 4 other kingdoms, and if it loses the protection of the treaty, all of them will try to invade. He also remembers that Gaius was a powerful king because he strengthened the army and secured both the northern and southern borders. In the end, Julius is forced to accept Jean and Kazuya's demands, and everyone begins negotiating the amount of compensation. Kazuya asks for an amount equal to 2 years of Amadonia's national income. He explains that it does not have to be paid all at once and can be settled in installments as long as every payment is made in imperial currency. Julius rejects the amount, but Jean reminds him that if he does not pay, he will not be able to reclaim his capital. Licia Elfrieden then tells everyone that 50% of Amadonia's budget is spent on military affairs. She suggests taking 20% of that amount because it would weaken their ability to rebuild a powerful army. Kazuya then asks Jean what will happen if Amadonia misses a payment deadline. She replies that, in that case, the Empire will support the kingdom of Fredonia in taking Van City once again. Kazuya does not stop there. He also demands that Julius provide the broadcast gem as security for the compensation. Julius becomes angry again because the kingdom owns only one broadcast gem. Even so, Kazuya continues with his demands and asks for every book in the palace library to make up for the shortage of money. Surprisingly, Julius agrees to hand over the books without any objection, and Jen smiles as though she finally feels relieved. After that, Julius asks Kazuya to release the captured soldiers and return them. Kazuya agrees but demands ransom for the nobles and high-ranking knights. Hakuya Kwanmin then gives Julius a list of the people who committed war crimes during the battle and demands that they be handed over. Once Julius hands over those people, Kazuya will begin releasing the prisoners they are holding. Julius asks him whether there is a girl among the prisoners named Roroa Amadonia, then tells Kazuya that she is his younger sister. Kazuya replies that he heard she escaped from Van City with the government officials as soon as the fighting began. He then says they can search for her among the prisoners if Julius wants. However, Julius answers, no. Forget it. Licia Elfrieden realizes that he is only trying to find out whether his sister might become a rival for the throne. She is upset that even after everything that happened, he still views her that way. After that, Kazuya requests that Brigadier General Margarita transfer to his kingdom. Julius agrees, but demands that 5 nobles be released without ransom in exchange. John Euphoria tries to warn him, explaining that Margarita is both intelligent and powerful, and that trading her for 5 nobles is nothing but a foolish decision. However, Julius ignores her warning. Once Kazuya accepts the condition, everyone begins signing the agreement. After the negotiations end, Julius leaves in a terrible mood. Before he gets too far, Kazuya stops him and tells him about a political thinker from his world named Machiavelli. According to him, someone who gains power through hardship can maintain it easily, while someone who gains it without effort will struggle to keep it. Julius asks what he means by that. Kazuya explains that Julius will not be able to control the situation easily because of the nobles who will return to the country. Julius becomes angry and continues walking, saying that the country belonged to him from the beginning. However, Kazuya stops him once again and reminds him that he used the power of another nation to reclaim it. He adds that this means Julius gained power easily, exactly as Machiavelli described. Julius replies that he never asked for his opinion, then leaves. After that, Kazuya and his companions travel back to Fredonia. Along the way, they notice the clear sadness on the faces of Amadonia's people. Kazuya comments that the reason is probably Julius's return to power. Before Kazuya temporarily took control of the city and gave its people some freedom, they had been living under oppression. When night falls, Jean Euphoria returns to the Empire and meets Empress Maria Euphoria. She tells her that everything went according to their plan and that Van City has been returned to Amadonia. Maria says that is good, but her expression suddenly changes. She tells Jean to forget about work for now, then hugs her and welcomes her home. After that, Maria eagerly asks about Kazuya and what kind of person he is. Jean tells her that he keeps a bed inside his office, just like Maria does. She then begins describing his personality and explains how intelligent he is, as he was able to understand the Empire's true goals. She also tells Maria that he has several interesting ideas, such as using broadcast gems to entertain the people. She even mentions his theory that monsters may be like animals raised by demons. Maria falls deep into thought as she listens in surprise. Jean continues, explaining that Kazuya views the world in a completely different way from them. She also tells her about the secret alliance and explains everything that happened. After hearing all the details, Maria laughs and says that Fredonia, a kingdom that had been so close to collapse that they were trying to find a way to save it, has suddenly become a reliable ally, capable of protecting the eastern part of the continent. Maria then asks Jean whether she remembers how the kingdom described the hero in the past. Jean replies that the hero was described as the person who would lead the world into a new age. She adds that this description came from old records, unlike the common belief that the hero would rule the world or defeat the demon lord. Maria agrees and says that everything happening recently feels like the beginning of a true revolution. Because of that, she wants to meet Kazuya face to face as soon as possible. Elsewhere, Kazuya's puppet is sitting with a group of adventurers as they eat together. It is then revealed that Kazuya and Licia Elfrieden have organized a banquet at Parnham Castle. Licia begins by giving a speech in which she thanks the fighters for protecting the people. After that, the banquet begins. Everyone enjoys the food, and happiness is clear on their faces. In the end, Kazuya's puppet becomes exhausted from eating too much. Licia then keeps staring at a green-haired girl for a long time, until the girl becomes confused by her gaze. It is then revealed that Kazuya was hiding inside the puppet, and had been attending the banquet the entire time. Licia asks him about the green-haired girl, Yona. Kazuya becomes nervous and starts trying to explain the situation. After that, Kazuya visits Georg Carmine in his cell and asks how he is doing in prison. Georg replies that the place is more comfortable than he expected. Kazuya then begins speaking with him and reveals that Licia wants to visit and talk to him. Georg becomes angry and wonders why a princess who is about to become queen would want to meet a prisoner like him. Kazuya replies that Licia keeps herself busy with work so she can forget that Georg is currently imprisoned. Georg tells him that he already said goodbye to Licia from the moment Kazuya sent him the warning about the attack. Kazuya realizes that Georg refuses to meet her because he does not want her memories to return and make her sad again. After that, Georg begins asking about his family, the castle, and the soldiers. Kazuya explains what happened and says that he was forced to punish those close to the traitors because he had to enforce the law. Georg praises him and says that his actions were wise. However, Kazuya admits that he is still disturbed by the law that orders the execution of a traitor and all relatives up to the 3rd degree. He describes it as excessive. Georg explains that this world contains many races, not only humans and monsters, so family connections can be extremely wide. Kazuya becomes even more troubled because he was forced to sacrifice the lives of many innocent people just to enforce the law. He feels the weight of responsibility, especially since he had been nothing more than an ordinary person until recently. Georg interrupts him and says that he once received a letter from Licia filled with praise for Kazuya. This only makes Kazuya feel worse because he knows he will have to make a decision that will break Licia's heart, carrying out Georg Carmine's execution. Kazuya then tells him that his plan to gather all the traitorous nobles in one place and strip them of their property and savings in a single move was one of the best plans ever made for the kingdom. However, such a plan could never have been carried out openly. It is then revealed that Georg had been cooperating with Kazuya from the beginning to gather all the traitorous nobles and eliminate them. Kazuya was forced to treat him as a traitor so the plan would not be exposed. Kazuya becomes angry when he sees that Georg is prepared to sacrifice himself. He asks whether Georg is truly satisfied with dying and having his name remembered beside the names of the traitorous nobles. He then scolds him, saying they could have dealt with those nobles one by one and that his sacrifice was unnecessary. Georg smiles and replies that he is completely satisfied. He had always been prepared to sacrifice himself for his country and so that the princess could live happily. Kazuya calms down slightly, then asks whether Georg planned everything by himself. Georg is surprised by the question, so Kazuya explains that Georg treats him with great respect and has entrusted Licia, whom he sees as his own daughter, to him. Because of that, he asks once again where such unusual loyalty came from. Georg replies, "Told you that my loyalty came from the letters the princess sent me, in which she described how capable you were. Would that be enough?" Kazuya answers that it would be enough, but it is not the full truth. He then asks whether all of Georg's actions were carried out under orders from the Elfrieden royal family. Georg replies that he cannot answer. Kazuya insists on knowing the truth, but Georg refuses once again and tells him that he will discover everything when the time comes. "You will learn the truth when the time is right. You will hear it yourself." Kazuya calms down and gives Georg Carmine a bottle of poison. Before Georg drinks it, Kazuya tells him that Licia has become part of his family and that he will protect his loved ones no matter what. Georg accepts his fate, drinks the poison, and dies. Kazuya later informs Licia of Georg's death. Though heartbroken, she quietly replies, "All right." Meanwhile, Hakuya speaks with Jean Euphoria, who says Maria accepted all of their requests and hopes to meet Kazuya soon. Jean notices Hakuya copying Julius's books by hand and jokingly invites him to become the Empire's chief librarian. Hakuya declines, saying he wishes to remain beside Kazuya and one day record the history of his reign. After the call, a mysterious figure remarks that everything seems to be unfolding as though fate itself is clearing Kazuya's path. The scene shifts to Roroa before Kazuya rewards those who fought in the war. He grants Randell to Glaive Magna and places him in command of Georg's former army. He then appoints Aisha as his personal bodyguard. Kazuya also thanks Woden Udgard for sending reinforcements. Woden's only request is that Kazuya marry Aisha. Although Kazuya worries about Lycia's reaction, she encourages him to accept, explaining that a king must marry into powerful families and that she prefers his first wives to be people she knows. Kazuya agrees. Next, Junadoma's grandmother, Excel Walter, explains that Juna is a commoner through her father's family and should no longer worry about her mother's past. Juna asks Kazuya to marry her as well, but he postpones the marriage because she is too popular with the public. He promises to marry her after someone else can replace her role on the kingdom's broadcast program. Later that night, several nobles secretly begin plotting against Kazuya. Elsewhere, Lycia speaks with Carla Vargas. Although she is jealous, she accepts that a king will have multiple wives. Carla asks whether she visited Georg, and Lycia replies that she only heard he had taken his own life. Carla feels guilty for the burden Lycia is carrying, but Lycia refuses to give up and insists they can still move forward together. Soon afterward, the trial of Castor and Carla begins. Hakuya states that their crimes deserve execution and confiscation of their property. XL argues that they never sought the throne and merely remained loyal to the former king, while Kazuya reminds everyone that the former king willingly gave him the crown. Castor accepts full responsibility and tries to protect Carla, but Kazuya points out that she knowingly joined the rebellion. Carla apologizes for losing her way before looking toward Lycia. The judges then debate their fate. Sursen and Owen argue that both Castor and Carla are too valuable to execute, especially because Castor can continue protecting the kingdom for centuries. The remaining judges insist that traitors must die because the law stands above everyone. After hearing every opinion, Kazuya orders only one thing: execution. He then quotes Machiavelli's idea that a ruler sometimes needs a measure of cruelty to ensure certain crimes are never repeated. At that moment, it is revealed that every judge demanding execution has actually been arrested, while only Owen and Sursen remain free. When Lycia and Aisha draw their swords, Kazuya stops them and introduces the newcomers as his own intelligence unit, the Black Cats. Their leader, Kagetora, receives orders to gather evidence and arrest anyone who resists. Kazuya explains that the 12 arrested nobles had secret ties to Amadonia and other kingdoms. Owen confirms they always sided with whichever faction appeared stronger. Finally, Hakuya explains that although Owen and Sursen's families had once been connected to those nobles, they are no longer involved, and their abilities will be invaluable to Kazuya's rule. Owen jokingly tells Kazuya that if he and Sursen had sided with the other nobles, they would have already lost their heads. Sursen gives him a look of disgust before Kazuya announces Castor Vargas's sentence. Castor will not be executed, but he is permanently banished from the Vargas Duchy, forbidden from contacting his son, and placed under Excel Walter's supervision. Kazuya then turns to Carla Vargas. He explains that, unlike her father, she does not have decades of service to justify a pardon. Castor begs Kazuya to execute him instead and spare Carla, insisting she merely obeyed his orders. But Kazuya refuses to listen and orders the guards to take Castor away. He then tells Carla that, because she was only a follower in the rebellion, her punishment will be lighter. Instead of execution, she will be stripped of her rank, reduced to a servant, and assigned to serve the royal family under Kazuya and Lycia. As she accepts her sentence, Kazuya quietly whispers a final order into her ear. If he ever loses his way and becomes a tyrant, she must kill him because no one else around him would ever be able to do it. Carla agrees, bringing the trial to an end. Later, Kazuya walks with Lycia and Aisha. Clearly exhausted, he asks them to leave him alone for a while before returning to his room, where he struggles with the guilt of ordering the execution of people who had not personally committed violent crimes. Elsewhere, Roroa laughs at Julius's foolishness. She believes paying compensation just to reclaim Van City will only make the citizens suffer. Curious about Kazuya, she asks Sebastian about him. Sebastian says Kazuya appears ordinary at first glance, but he sensed a sharp mind and a strong desire to protect the people around him. Hearing that, Roroa becomes fascinated and decides she wants to challenge him in a battle of strategy and diplomacy rather than on the battlefield. The following day, Kazuya asks Hakuya about the investigation. Hakuya reports that everything is progressing unusually smoothly. almost as though someone unknown is secretly helping them from the shadows. Their conversation is interrupted when Ludwin rushes in, saying one of his relatives has caused another major incident. He leads everyone to an old underground facility, explaining that it was once an ancient dungeon inherited by the royal family, before being converted into a research laboratory and later entrusted to the Maxwell family. Kazuya is surprised because the place reminds him of a garage from his old world. Inside waits Ludwin's childhood friend, Genya Maxwell, known as the Mad Forbidden Army scientist. As soon as they enter, Kazuya notices that the glowing floor is made of metal. Licia explains that it only shines because it has been enchanted with magic, though Kazuya still finds such ordinary things in this world fascinating. Genya welcomes everyone, invites them in for coffee, and explains that she used to be both a military mage and a weapons researcher before being dismissed because of her unusual experiments. Rather than creating weapons, she tried developing methods to help crops continue growing during wartime. Although the idea sounded impossible, she believed light magic could accelerate plant growth. Instead, her experiment caused an entire laboratory to be swallowed by gigantic trees, leaving everyone speechless. She admits she always preferred pursuing strange ideas instead of building more weapons. The conversation shifts to the Maxwell family's dungeon research. Genya explains that their discoveries suggest there are natural laws separate from ordinary magic. To demonstrate her point, she asks Kazuya how broadcast gems work. He repeats the common belief that Sylph and Undine spirits live inside the stones and allow them to transmit sound and images. Genya immediately tells him that this explanation contains two major mistakes. First, there is no proof that spirits inhabit the stones or even exist at all. Most people simply attribute mysterious phenomena to magic or spirits because they lack another explanation. Through their research, the Maxwell family discovered that combining air and water magic allows the stones to record and transmit images and sound, meaning the legends of Sylphs and Undines are merely popular beliefs rather than established facts. Her second revelation surprises Kazuya even more. Broadcast gems were never created for communication in the first place. They are actually dungeon cores, the devices that control an entire dungeon and continuously generate monsters. As long as a core remains active, monsters continue appearing. Once it is removed, the dungeon permanently becomes inactive. Adventurers enter dungeons to recover these cores because bringing one back earns immense wealth and honor, yet no one has ever succeeded in restoring a dead core. Kazuya asks whether the Maxwell family can reactivate one, but Genya admits they still have no idea how dungeon cores truly function. Kazuya finally understands her point. Humanity often labels anything it cannot explain as magic, even when it may simply follow unknown natural laws. He compares this way of thinking to the scientific principles of his former world. Hearing that, Genya becomes thrilled, and explains that such knowledge is known in this world as over-science. Excited, Genya then unveils her latest invention, the Little Susumu Mark V. She explains that it is powerful enough to carry ships and outperform even dragons in lifting heavy loads. Kazuya quickly realizes it works as a propulsion device that pulls air in from the front and blasts it out the back. Genya immediately activates the prototype, but the experiment goes wrong, filling the room with an overwhelming torrent of air and sending Kazuya flying across the laboratory. Ludwin reaches the control device and shuts it down. Genya laughs and says, Sorry, I was supposed to activate it in the opposite direction." Ludwin gets angry with her, but Kazuya calms him down and praises her invention. Genya then starts talking about it in such an unusual way that it is obvious she is completely obsessed with her work. The power source of the device is a metallic spell cube. Licia recognizes it because miners often use magic while searching for ore. However, whenever one of these cubes is present, their magic becomes ineffective. If someone tries to forcefully use magic near it, the cube explodes. She finishes by telling Kazuya that it possesses negative energy. Genya immediately disagrees. She explains that the cube does not contain negative energy. Instead, it generates energy by preventing magic from working. That means its power is not negative at all. It simply operates in a completely different way from ordinary magic. Kazuya quickly understands what she means and concludes that the cube absorbs magical energy. As always, Genya praises him for understanding her so quickly. She then explains that the explosion occurs because the cube cannot withstand the amount of magical energy it absorbs, causing it to burst. That is why she chose it as the power source for her invention. Kazuya realizes that the cube is essentially a rechargeable battery. He immediately begins thinking that this technology could spark an industrial revolution. However, he also realizes that if people discover the source of its power is the cursed cube everyone hates, it could trigger enormous conflict. After that, Kazuya speaks privately with Licia and tells her that Jinya has become an extremely important person. He promises to explain everything later before asking how they can protect her and ensure she remains in the kingdom. Licia tells him that belonging to the Maxwell family already offers considerable protection, but another option would be arranging her marriage to someone they trust. Kazuya then asks whether Jinya has feelings for Ludwin. Licia replies that, from a woman's perspective, there is about a 60% chance that she does. She then asks about Ludwin, and Kazuya confidently says that his feelings for Jinya are obvious, about 99%. Kazuya approaches them and proposes that they get married. Jinya immediately agrees, while Ludwin looks completely confused by what is happening. Jinya remains calm, as though it means very little to her. However, she admits to herself that she always knew she would eventually settle down with someone, and she had always assumed that person would be Ludwin, because he was the most suitable choice. Ludwin tries to avoid the situation with a few simple excuses, but Kazuya assures him that he will solve every problem. At that point, Ludwin gathers his courage and proposes to Jinya. She accepts, and the two officially become engaged. After everything is settled, Ludwin tells Kazuya that he completely forgot to mention the trouble Jinya caused, and both of them apologize. Kazuya asks what happened, and Ludwin explains that Jinya stole dragon bones. During Kazuya's reign, the kingdom was flourishing in every direction, and many new districts were being built. While construction was underway at one site, workers discovered the bones of dragons. However, they mysteriously disappeared without a trace. It turns out that Jinya was the one who took them. Licia tells Ludwin that the incident happened a long time ago, and that everyone would have forgotten about it if he had not brought it up again. Ludwin explains that the mistake was actually his. Jinya had sent him a letter long ago informing him that she intended to take the dragon bones and asking him to complete the paperwork. Unfortunately, he never noticed the message because it had been written on such a tiny piece of paper. Jinya blames Ludwin, while Ludwin blames Jinya in return, turning the argument into a comedic scene. Kazuya interrupts them and asks what she actually did with the dragon bones. Jinya becomes excited and proudly reveals something strange. She calls it Mikadora, a mechanical dragon she built using monster remains and magical components she found inside a dungeon. Kazuya jokes that it looks as though it is about to attack them. Jinya replies that it cannot move at the moment because it lacks a control engine capable of sending commands to its limbs. She explains that she built it to study how the joints of living creatures function. Ludwin becomes furious and accuses her of insulting the dragons. Kazuya then tells Licia that they should send an official letter of apology to Star Dragon Mountain. Licia agrees and adds that they will most likely have to return the bones to their homeland or bury them once again. Kazuya walks up to the mechanical dragon and activates it using his own magical energy. To everyone's surprise, it actually begins moving. Licia immediately asks whether it could be used in combat. After that, Kazuya gathers everyone for a brief meeting. He tells them that Mikadora must remain a secret until they receive news from Star Dragon Mountain. He then tells Jinya that he will build a laboratory for her in Fredonia, where she will be free to research whatever she wants. However, 10% of her research must be dedicated to projects that benefit the kingdom. Meanwhile, Poncho's bridge, the one Kazuya built, has been destroyed. The people are upset because it had made traveling throughout the city much easier. They complain that life has become difficult again ever since Julius returned to power. Many of the citizens even wish Kazuya would conquer them once more so they could regain the quality of life he had provided. A messenger reports the situation to Julius, telling him that the people are constantly complaining about the current conditions. Julius arrogantly responds that they should blame Fredonia for everything, and insists there is nothing he can do. Suddenly, another man rushes in and reports that the people of Gallo province have revolted because of food shortages, and that some citizens have already died from starvation. Instead of trying to solve the crisis, Julius arrogantly tells the man to deal with his own problems. However, the man argues that crushing the rebellion would be a good opportunity to demonstrate Julius's authority. The moment Julius realizes there is something to gain personally, he changes his mind. He announces that he will personally go to Gallo and put an end to the rebellion. Elsewhere, Kazuya is spending time playing with children. He then jokes with Carla, telling her that the maid outfit does not suit her at all. Carla replies that she has been training with Serena to learn how to serve others, but Serena keeps hitting her with a whip. Serena calmly explains that the whip is simply another expression of love, and that love should be accepted in every form. Carla freezes in fear after realizing Serena is standing right behind her. Later, Hakuya reports the news of the rebellion in Amadonia to Kazuya. He explains that the uprising was eventually suppressed, but it was crushed so brutally that it was meant to serve as a warning to anyone who might consider rebelling in the future. He adds that this is the wrong way to use force because it will only make the people even angrier. The representative of Van City then delivers a letter to Hakuya. It states that the citizens of Van wish to form an alliance with the Kingdom of Fredonia and are requesting its support. Kazuya immediately agrees to send assistance. Elsewhere, Julius is furious that Van City, the place where he was raised, has betrayed him and declared its loyalty to Kazuya. Soon afterward, even worse news reaches him. Many nobles now wish to remove Julius's family from the throne, and they all declare open rebellion against him. Not long after, Hakuya receives another report stating that Julius has withdrawn his army and fled to the empire. Kazuya is surprised because everything is unfolding exactly as they hoped. If anything, it is going even better than expected. With Julius gone, the Principality of Amadonia is left without a prince. The Duchy of Lunaria in the north and the Republic of Turgis in the south have both been waiting for this opportunity. Meanwhile, the mercenary state of Zem shows no intention of invading directly. Instead, it dispatches groups of mercenaries to both Lunaria and Turgis. Lunaria is a nation devoted to the moon. It sends its soldiers into Amadonia under the pretext of protecting the regions along the shared border. The Republic of Turgis, on the other hand, is an extremely cold nation, especially across its southern peninsula. Its leaders want to invade Amadonia because their homeland is covered almost entirely in snow, leaving them with virtually no farmland for agriculture. However, Turgis's advance is halted by the fierce resistance of the veteran Colonel Herman, the commander of Nelva Province, an isolated territory located in southern Amadonia. Suddenly, Hakuya reports to Kazuya that they have received a joint request from Colonel Herman Neumann and the former Minister of Finance, Gatsby Colbert. In their official petition, they formally ask the Kingdom of Fredonia to annex the entire Principality of Amadonia. Licia says that this is the most reasonable option because joining Fredonia is far better than allowing Amadonia to fall apart and become divided. Juna also tells Kazuya that having the support of those two influential men would prevent anyone in Amadonia from opposing them. Kazuya asks Hakuya whether those two were the mysterious people secretly helping them all along, but Hakuya admits that he is not certain. Kazuya begins carefully considering the annexation of Amadonia. He sees many advantages, including a larger population and a stronger kingdom. Amadonia is also rich in natural resources and valuable minerals. However, the greatest drawback is its food shortage. Conditions remain stable in Van because it is the capital, but the rest of the country is in poor condition. Kazuya explains that this is a serious problem because Fredonia only barely overcame its own food crisis. In addition, Amadonia was their enemy until recently, so governing its people will not be easy. He also points out that annexing Amadonia would create borders with even more hostile nations, making diplomacy much more complicated. Furthermore, if they absorb Amadonia, they will lose the war reparations that the principality was supposed to pay. Kazuya initially wants to reject the request, but he realizes he has no real choice except to accept it. If he refuses now, it would contradict his earlier decision to occupy Van in response to the wishes of Amadonia's citizens. Moreover, if he declines, most of Amadonia's population will simply migrate to Fredonia, flooding the kingdom with refugees. Kazuya tells everyone that annexation will benefit them in the long run, but it will be extremely difficult in the present. In the end, he makes his decision and agrees to annex Amadonia. He immediately begins dispatching troops, and the kingdom's banner is replaced with the flag of the Kingdom of Fredonia. After that, Colbert, who previously worked alongside Roroa, arrives carrying countless reports containing legal documents, contracts, financial records, and the revenues and expenditures of the Principality of Amadonia. Kazuya is shocked to learn that Julius ruled the country without ever looking at any of those documents. He thanks Colbert for bringing them because they will greatly simplify the administration of the kingdom. However, Kazuya tells him to keep the records since he served as the former Minister of Finance. He then asks whether Colbert would like to continue serving as Minister of Finance in the newly expanded Kingdom of Fredonia. Colbert is astonished and immediately accepts. However, he asks Kazuya how he can trust someone who was born in Amadonia. Kazuya replies that his origins do not matter as long as he is capable. He points out that Colbert managed to prevent Amadonia from going bankrupt, even though most of its budget was devoted to the military. He concludes by saying that Colbert is an exceptionally competent and reliable man. Afterward, Kazuya speaks with Hermann Neumann and thanks him for holding back the forces of Turgis. He explains that without Hermann's resistance, Fredonia's reinforcements would never have arrived in time. Hermann simply replies that he is a soldier who only fulfilled his duty. He then tells Kazuya that he brought him a gift, but asks him not to return it after accepting it. The gift turns out to be a piece of cloth woven in his province. As Kazuya examines it more closely, he realizes that it is actually a carpet. Kazuya immediately senses that something about the gift is unusual. He asks, "There's a girl hiding inside this carpet, isn't there?" At that moment, it is revealed that Roroa is indeed hiding inside. She climbs out and says, "You ruined the surprise of the season, Kazuya." Kazuya replies that someone in his old world once used the same trick before asking why she came here. Roroa calmly answers that she came to marry him, leaving Kazuya completely stunned. Licia immediately becomes angry, but Roroa explains that she intends to do exactly what Licia did. She wants to marry Kazuya to grant him legitimacy over Amadonia, which would benefit him in every way. Licia argues that all of Kazuya's fiancés chose to stay with him because they genuinely love him, while Roroa's motives are purely political. Roroa immediately responds that she loves Kazuya as well. She explains that she first came to admire him after watching him through the broadcast gems. Since the broadcast gems are already being discussed, she proposes that Kazuya begin advertising merchants' products during his broadcasts, making him the official spokesperson. Kazuya immediately understands the idea because it resembles commercial sponsorships from his previous world. If successful, the advertising revenue would completely cover the cost of producing future broadcasts. Kazuya asks whether she is truly certain about marrying the man responsible for her father's death. Roroa calmly replies that she does not care. She then reveals that she herself orchestrated the rebellions to drive her brother out of the country. She goes on to discuss Amadonia's mineral wealth, explaining that the principality possesses little besides its rich mineral resources. She also expresses deep frustration with both her father and her brother because neither of them ever cared about the people. Their entire focus was placed on expanding the military while ignoring the country's future. What the nation truly needed was food and employment. Roroa then tells Kazuya that Hermann, Colbert, and the elderly leaders of the kingdom are her real family. Those are the people she truly wishes to protect. At that moment, Kazuya finally understands why Julius wanted to get rid of Roroa. Roroa also explains that the rebellion Julius managed to suppress only happened because followers of Lunaria secretly encouraged the people to rise up. Kazuya is slightly confused, so Roroa explains that Lunaria is not interested in conquering land. Instead, it wants loyal followers. Kazuya asks for her opinion of Lunaria. She answers that she has nothing against its faith itself, but believes that some people exploit that religion for wealth and political influence. Kazuya hopes he will never have to deal with Lunaria, but he realizes that contact is inevitable because Lunaria despises both Star Dragon Mountain and the Grand Chaos Empire. One thing still confuses Kazuya. Why does Lunaria hate the Grand Chaos Empire? Juna explains that the Empire calls Maria the Saint, while according to Lunaria's religion, that title belongs exclusively to the High Priest. As a result, Lunaria considers Maria an evil woman pretending to be a saint. Kazuya finds that difficult to understand because the people themselves gave Maria that title. She never claimed it for herself. However, Lunaria's followers do not care about that distinction. Kazuya still wonders why Lunaria would want to approach him. Roroa smiles and tells him that he greatly underestimates himself. She reminds him that he revived a kingdom that was on the verge of collapse, successfully united Amadonia with Freedonia, and introduced revolutionary changes throughout their world. Because of those achievements, Lunaria's high priest might one day grant him a title such as the Holy King. If that happens, the kingdom could become known as the Holy Kingdom of Freedonia, making it an extremely powerful rival to the Grand Chaos Empire. After that, Roroa asks everyone to stop discussing politics and return to the subject of her marriage to Kazuya. She immediately begins acting in an overly childish manner, greatly annoying Licia and everyone else. Kazuya quietly reflects on the situation and realizes that marrying Roroa offers numerous advantages from several different perspectives. He then suddenly turns to Licia and asks for her opinion. Licia tells him that if he truly believes marrying Roroa is the right decision, then he should do it. She is not the only one who supports him. The others agree as well. Roroa then tells Kazuya that she has no interest in the throne or the line of succession. All she wants is to continue running her own businesses. She explains that Kazuya has countless projects but cannot possibly fund all of them at once. Because of that, she offers to support him with both her wealth and her business ideas. Kazuya is surprised and points out that people will speak badly of a queen who behaves like a merchant. Roroa reassures him by saying that she will operate entirely behind the scenes and use Sebastian as her public representative. At that moment, Colbert asks Kazuya for permission to speak as the kingdom's future Minister of Finance. He turns to Roroa and tells her that if she truly possesses that much money, it would be better to place it in the national treasury. To everyone's surprise, Kazuya and Roroa reject the suggestion at exactly the same time. Roroa explains that she wants to earn money so Kazuya can use it, and that their future children will inherit her businesses. After teasing Licia and the others, Licia drags her away from Kazuya. Soon afterward, Kazuya and Roroa's engagement is officially announced. Amadonia is fully annexed, and the expanded nation is renamed the Kingdom of Fredonia. Kazuya then contacts Maria through the broadcast gems. She questions the annexation, reminding him that the Humanity Declaration forbids changing national borders. To explain his actions, Kazuya tells the story of two world leaders with opposing ideologies. One believed in equality through shared wealth, while the other believed in freedom and competition. Their rivalry harmed countless smaller nations, so 3 rules were established. Borders could not change, people had the right to choose their own future, and both sides would cooperate peacefully. However, when another group later demanded independence, the agreement became trapped in a contradiction, because recognizing its freedom would also change national borders. Maria realizes the Humanity Declaration suffers from the same loophole. Kazuya explains that such flaws only become obvious when rules are tested in reality, which is why he refused to sign the agreement in the first place. Maria says her goal has always been to unite humanity peacefully against the Demon Lord's army, so she promises not to interfere with the annexation of Amadonia. Their conversation soon shifts to Roroa and Lunaria. Maria warns that Lunaria still opposes the Empire and may exploit the loopholes in international agreements. Kazuya agrees that Lunaria could become a threat to both Fredonia and the Empire, but promises that Fredonia will continue supporting the Empire's efforts to unite humanity. After ending the call, Kazuya is greeted by Hakuya, who reminds him of the mountain of paperwork waiting for him. The following morning, Aisha and Licia enter Kazuya's room and are shocked to find Roroa sleeping beside him. Kazuya insists he went to bed alone, while Roroa casually claims she was too lazy to return to her own room. Later, Kazuya praises Roroa's economic talent, but she explains that rebuilding an entire country's economy requires many capable administrators. Since the kingdom lacks qualified officials, Licia suggests holding recruitment exams. Kazuya instead proposes finding people who already possess administrative experience. This leads to the topic of slavery, which exists throughout Landia. Among the slave traders, Ginger Camus is especially well known. After inheriting the business from his grandfather, Ginger treats his frightened slaves with kindness, surprising them all. A raccoon demi-human girl named Sand tells him that his grandfather cared deeply for every slave and had warned them that Ginger knew nothing about the trade. Ginger reveals that he plans to sell every slave and leave the business forever. Sand pleads with him to continue so they will not be sold to cruel traders. She even offers him a magical whip so he can punish her for speaking out of turn, but Ginger refuses and instead promises to sell them only to people he personally trusts. He then buys food and new clothes for everyone before teaching them reading, writing, and multiplication. Ginger explains that education increases their value, even if few buyers appreciate educated slaves. When he invites Sand to study as well, she reveals that she already knows how to read and write because she once worked in her family's shop. She sadly explains that when her family's business was close to bankruptcy, they sold her into slavery to save both the store and the rest of the family. Night falls, but Ginger Camus fails to find a suitable buyer. Sand asks why he rejected so many offers, and Ginger explains that every buyer treated slaves as tools. Since he promised to sell them only to kind people, he chooses to keep waiting despite the risk of going bankrupt, remembering his grandfather's words that patience always brings opportunity. The following day, crowds gather after hearing that Ginger owns slaves who can read and write. They explain that the king's new evaluation system rewards nobles who can manage their territories well, making educated slaves highly valuable. Ginger agrees to sell them on one condition: families must stay together. The buyers happily accept, and by the end of the day, only Sand remains. Ginger thanks Sand for speaking her mind earlier because her advice led him to make a better decision. Overcome with emotion, she thanks him for feeding, clothing, and educating everyone before bursting into tears. At that moment, Kazuya arrives in disguise and offers an enormous amount of gold to buy Sand before promising to free her. Ginger refuses, insisting that Sand is already free and will work beside him in his new business. Sand begs to stay with him. The others suddenly appear and Kazuya reveals that everything was a test. After removing his glasses, Ginger realizes he is speaking to the king. Kazuya explains that he came because he heard about a slave trader who genuinely cared for his slaves. He praises Ginger's educational efforts and reveals his plan to reform slavery by educating slaves, turning slave traders into government employees, and creating training centers where former slaves can learn real professions. When Ginger is left speechless, Kazuya appoints him director of the training center and tells him to use the gold as the starting capital for his new work. Sand happily tells Ginger that his grandfather's words finally came true. Later, Kazuya and Lycia travel south to the city of Castle. After passing through a poor district, Kazuya explains how he transformed it by improving sanitation, rebuilding houses, capturing criminals, and educating the residents, greatly improving public health. He then teaches everyone about microorganisms, explaining that disease spreads through invisible organisms in the air, water, and soil. Since light magic cannot cure infectious diseases, improving hygiene became one of his highest priorities. Kazuya introduces the three-eyed race, explaining that they understood microorganisms long ago and developed advanced medicine. They even created a microscope to observe them and discovered antibiotics, which Kazuya renames Mitsumedin, describing it as a magical medicine against infectious diseases. Although production remains limited because of a shortage of gelmatics, the plant-based ingredient required to make it, Kazuya promises to cooperate fully in advancing medicine for everyone, rather than keeping the discovery for himself. Kazuya then assigns Tomoe to search for that material because this environment is perfectly suited to her ability to communicate with animals, allowing her to locate the gelatin much faster. After that, they notice a blonde girl sitting nearby while disinfecting the entire area. Owen immediately steps forward to protect Kazuya because her behavior seems strange, especially since she keeps laughing to herself. However, Kazuya asks him to calm down before introducing her. Her name is Hilda Norg, a member of the three-eyed race with exceptionally advanced medical skills. Kazuya introduces her to the people traveling with him. Hilda says that she already knows the two girls, but she does not recognize the old man and has no desire to become acquainted with him because he is covered in filth. Owen becomes angry, but Hilda quickly pushes him away from her. Kazuya asks about her partner, and Hilda tells him that he wandered off somewhere strange as usual. His name is Brad. Kazuya then introduces Brad to Lycia through his explanation, telling her that Brad is Hilda's partner and also a doctor. He adds that Brad is an ordinary human, but his abilities are more than sufficient to make him an excellent physician. Kazuya then reveals that the reason he came to this city was to inspect the condition of the training center, where he appointed Ginger Kamu as director. When Kazuya arrives, Ginger becomes so nervous that he can barely speak. Kazuya calms him down and introduces the people accompanying him. It turns out that Ginger already knows Hilda because she regularly visits the children and performs medical examinations on them. Lycia asks whether the center teaches only children. Ginger replies that adults are also taught after they finish their daily work. Kazuya tells them that he wants to add new subjects to the curriculum, including civil engineering and training for people who wish to explore dungeons. Hilda and several other specialists will also teach the fundamentals of medicine. Kazuya's ultimate goal is to raise the educational standard of the entire kingdom until it becomes the best in the world. Ginger then shares some good news. The number of people attending classes continues to increase because of the school lunch program Kazuya proposed. The rule is simple. Every child under the age of 12 receives a free lunch, but only if they attend their lessons. It is an extremely effective plan because the children receive an education while also gaining access to food if their families are poor. Adults, however, are much more difficult to convince. Most of them believe that they have lived their entire lives without learning to read or write, so gaining those skills now would make no difference. That is always their excuse. Kazuya tells Ginger not to worry, because he will personally educate them about why learning is important. After confirming that the training center is functioning properly, Kazuya suggests leaving the city walls. Lycia warns him that the area outside is even more dangerous than the poor district because many refugees live there. Kazuya replies that those refugees are exactly the people he intends to visit. When Hilda hears that, she tells him that she will accompany them because Brad is also outside the walls. Everyone notices that the refugees do not pay much attention to cleanliness. However, the strength in their eyes reveals the severity of the hardships they have endured. Licia then asks Kazuya about the aid he previously promised them. He explains that he provided food, firewood, and several basic necessities. He also asked the guild to send patrols to protect them. Licia understands why he supplied food, but she is confused about the need for guards. Kazuya explains that the victims of certain crimes can sometimes cause international incidents. However, people who have lost their homeland are treated differently. Some believe that as long as the refugees do not cause trouble, they should simply be left alone. Kazuya does not agree with that way of thinking, so he decided to protect them. Suddenly, several men appear and attempt to kidnap the refugee children. When the refugees resist, a violent fight breaks out. Carla and Owen move forward to confront the attackers, while Hilda begins treating the injured. Licia remains beside Kazuya to protect him. However, Kazuya spots Yuno and immediately rushes forward to defend her. He successfully blocks one of the attackers' strikes, but becomes so pleased with himself that he loses focus on the battle. Licia and Yuno quickly step in and save him. Once the fighting ends, Licia embraces Kazuya while crying and begins scolding him harshly. Suddenly, Yuno grabs Kazuya and asks how he knows her name. Kazuya tries to explain but stops himself because he previously spent time with her while disguised as a puppet. When Owen and Carla return, Kazuya uses their arrival as an opportunity to change the subject. After the attackers are captured, they confess that a slave trader ordered them to kidnap the children. They explain that the king transformed slave trading into a government-regulated profession. However, the man they worked for failed the qualification examinations. As a result, he decided to abduct children and women, sell them, and then flee the kingdom. Kazuya becomes furious and attacks them. Afterward, he orders Carla to deliver the information to Hakuya so that he can act immediately. The refugees gather in front of Kazuya and his companions to thank them. However, Kazuya points toward the others and says that those adventurers were the ones who saved them. He does this to prevent their true identities from being exposed while they are in disguise. Then, they leave the area. Kazuya next heads toward the person responsible for the refugees because he wants to find a permanent solution to the crisis. Refugees in Fredonia are treated relatively well. In the kingdoms located near the Demon Lord's domain, refugees are often forced to fight until they die. In other words, they are treated like slaves. After stabilizing the internal situation of his kingdom, Kazuya decides to solve the refugee problem before it grows worse. He enters the tent of the refugee leader, a man named Jerokoma. His younger sister Komain is standing beside him. Kazuya tells Jerokoma that he already sent him a proposal and asks what decision he has made. Komain becomes angry and prepares to respond, but Jerokoma stops her. Licia is confused by the situation, so Kazuya explains that the refugees must choose between two options. They can either abandon their former homeland and join the kingdom of Fredonia, or leave the kingdom entirely. He then reminds Jerokoma that their homeland has been occupied by the Demon Lord's forces and that returning there is nearly impossible. He asks whether they intend to continue wandering from country to country while waiting for a homeland that may never return. Kazuya also explains that their current situation is technically illegal. This time, he speaks with complete firmness. It is revealed that he only continued supporting them out of respect for King Albert's final wishes, and he cannot keep providing aid forever. His true goal is to make them feel a sense of belonging toward the country in which they now live. Jerokoma becomes furious, but manages to restrain himself. Komain, however, cannot control her anger. She tells Kazuya that he already possesses his own kingdom, so he could never understand what it feels like to lose one's homeland. Kazuya replies that he understands that pain better than she could possibly imagine. He was summoned from another world, and there is no way for him to return to it. He then offers them another opportunity to join his kingdom. Jerokoma asks how they will be treated if they accept. He wants to know whether Fredonia will follow the example of the Grand Chaos Empire and allow refugees to live in an independent, autonomous region. Kazuya replies that he cannot adopt the Grand Chaos Empire's policy because it is too dangerous. If refugees reclaim the land they live on and develop it, they will eventually begin to consider it their own. Kazuya understands that the current generation may not have a problem with that arrangement. However, the next generation will create the real crisis because they will not understand that the land was originally intended to be only a temporary home. He tells Jerokoma that his own approach is different from the Grand Chaos Empire's policy, but that does not mean he believes the Empire's approach is wrong. Jerokoma finally loses his patience and says, "You are driving us away, yet you also refuse to let us live independently. What exactly do you want from us?" Owen takes out a map, and Kazuya begins explaining that there is a coastal city called Venetanova, which is currently under construction. He plans to add new facilities and develop it into a culturally advanced city. Kazuya tells them that he intends to relocate the refugees there. This situation will be different because they will live inside the city rather than receive an entire territory of their own. As a result, the problems he mentioned earlier will not occur. He ends by promising that as long as they work within this kingdom, they will never have to endure another day of hunger or freezing cold. Jirokoma is delighted and says that it is a generous offer, while his younger sister becomes angry with Kazuya. It is clear that she feels as though he is merely throwing food in front of them and ordering them to go after it. Jirokoma explains to Komain that the king is offering them the chance to live as citizens of the kingdom. Komain asks what is so special about that, and whether accepting the offer means giving up their right to return to their homeland. Kazuya does not become upset. He admits that their conflicting opinions are understandable because his offer is generous in one sense, but cruel in another. Jirokoma explains that some refugees are fanatically committed to returning home, and several of them are even more extreme than Komain. For that reason, he tells Kazuya that he will hold a meeting with everyone in the camp before giving him a final answer. He also asks Kazuya not to worry because he will try to persuade as many people as possible, even if he is ultimately forced to divide the refugees into separate groups. Kazuya understands that Jirokoma intends to expel those who refuse the proposal, but Jirokoma simply asks him for more time. Suddenly, someone enters the tent and asks where Hilda is. The moment Hilda sees him, she becomes furious and demands to know why he abandoned his work and forced her to handle everything alone. Brad tells her that he will listen to her complaints later, but he urgently needs her help. A woman is currently giving birth, but the position of the baby is causing severe complications. Hilda explains that in cases like this, only one of them usually survives, either the mother or the child. Therefore, they will have to perform a cesarean section. She adds that the survival rate for mothers undergoing such an operation is less than 20%. Brad tells her that if they perform the operation together, the chance of success may rise to 100%. Carla enters the tent, and the moment she arrives, Hilda orders her to go to the medical center in the city and bring back her equipment. Carla becomes confused and remains standing in place, but Kazuya tells her that this is an emergency and orders her to do exactly as Hilda said. Carla immediately leaves to retrieve the equipment. Hilda then asks Jirokoma for permission to use his tent for the delivery, because she needs the cleanest possible environment. Jirokoma agrees, and Hilda tells him that they will also need blood transfusions. She asks him to gather the people in the camp. She also asks Kazuya to explain the importance of cleanliness to Jirokoma. Everyone begins cleaning and organizing the tent while Brad and Hilda discuss the details of the operation. Kazuya suddenly thinks of boiling water to kill the bacteria inside it. He then begins sterilizing the medical tools as Hilda requested. Licia becomes worried, but Kazuya reassures her that this procedure was considered relatively simple in his old world. Their world even possesses the additional advantage of light magic, which should make it easier. After that, Kazuya speaks with Jirokoma and tells him that the child about to be born will enter the world inside this kingdom. The child will know nothing about the refugees' homeland or their struggle over national identity, so it would be wrong to force that child to endure the same harsh life they have experienced. Suddenly, they hear the sound of a baby crying and realize that the operation has ended. Carla emerges from the tent and announces that the child is a boy and that both the mother and baby are safe. Everyone celebrates, but Carla looks completely exhausted. Hilda and Brad also emerge with their clothes covered in blood, both of them visibly drained. Jirokoma tells Kazuya that he will transfer leadership of the refugee camp to his sister. He intends to travel north and attempt to reclaim their homeland himself. He explains that this was what he wanted from the beginning, but he never knew how to express it. Jirokoma entrusts his sister to Kazuya, and Kazuya promises that he will do his best to protect her. Afterward, Licia happily holds the newborn child. Kazuya asks about the mother's condition and learns that she is doing well. He smiles and tells them that the success rate for this operation in his old world was nearly 100%. Carla becomes furious and begins scolding him. She points out that he has never experienced having his stomach cut open before, and asks whether he would like her to cut him open so he can understand the pain. She also tells him that he has no idea how much blood they had to transfuse to keep the mother alive. Kazuya apologizes to both Carla and the mother. The woman thanks him and says that she would have died without their help. She then asks him to choose a name for her son. Kazuya names him Fuku, and explains that the name means happiness in the country he came from. After that, Jiraiya leaves leadership of the refugees to his sister and departs for his homeland alongside those who volunteered to accompany him. The farewell is painful, but it remains a decision each person made freely. Later, Excel begins giving the girls lessons on how to become good wives. She also intends to prepare all of them for motherhood. A problem once occurred in Fredonia's royal family because the king who ruled before Albert failed to produce a suitable heir. For that reason, Excel decided to provide these lessons to prevent the same crisis from happening again. Excel was chosen for the task because she has lived for 500 years and fallen in love many times. She never separated from any of her husbands, and only death was able to part them. Everyone feels both surprised and embarrassed by the situation. Kazuya will also receive private lessons from her. Excel begins offering advice before revealing that she had someone cast a confession spell on Kazuya. She recorded everything he said inside the book she is holding. Everyone immediately becomes excited to hear what is written inside. Excel opens the book, beginning with Roroa. She reads Kazuya's opinion of her. He admits that he loves her cheerful personality and her affection for the people. He also believes she has a slightly cunning side, but finds that part of her charming as well. In addition, she is extremely intelligent, and he is grateful that she became his fiancée. Excel continues by explaining that she asked whether Kazuya had any other thoughts about Roroa. Kazuya admitted that he felt troubled because he was responsible for the death of her father. He also worried that Roroa may have agreed to marry him only because she felt forced to protect her position and influence within the government. Roroa becomes furious and tells Excel that she already thought about all of those issues before making her decision. She calls Kazuya an idiot because she genuinely wants to stay with him, and then begins crying. Licia embraces her and calms her down, promising that she will scold Kazuya on Roroa's behalf. Excel tells her that Kazuya thinks that way only because he loves her and is worried about her feelings. Roroa understands, but she remains upset that he still does not realize she truly loves him. Next comes Juna. Kazuya describes her as beautiful and kind, believing those two words alone are enough to express a great deal about her. He does not mean only her physical beauty, but also the beauty of her heart and spirit. When Excel asked about his personal feelings toward Juna, Kazuya said that he felt fortunate to be younger than her because she often spoiled him. Everyone becomes confused because both Kazuya and Juna are 19 years old. Excel explains that a year in Kazuya's old world consisted of 365 days, while a year in their world contains 384 days. Because of that difference, Juna is technically at least 1 year older than Kazuya. Juna becomes worried that Kazuya may not like women who are older than him. However, Excel reassures her by explaining that people in his old world often said that marrying a woman 1 year older was the ideal choice. Juna and Aisha both feel relieved because they are most likely older than him. After that, Excel reveals Kazuya's opinion of Aisha. He describes her as being similar to a beloved pet. He then continues by saying that she is powerful, noble, and an extraordinary warrior. He confidently declares that she is the strongest fighter in the entire kingdom. However, he feels something unusual toward her. Despite her strength, he wants to protect her. Aisha jokes that she must have failed as his personal bodyguard if Kazuya is the one who wants to protect her. Strangely enough, the other girls admit that they feel the same way about Aisha. Finally, it is Licia's turn. However, Kazuya's answer is that he does not want to say anything about her inside the book because he wants to tell her his feelings directly, face to face. The other girls immediately begin teasing Licia and tell her that she is the only special one. Excel then announces that if they remain until the end of the lesson, she will give them a set of highly classified documents marked with instructions to burn them after reading. The documents contain a list of things Kazuya would like each of them to do. After that, Maria receives a letter from Juna regarding the issue of slave traders. In it, Juna explains the new system Kazuya established and the reforms he ordered to be implemented throughout the kingdom. Maria realizes that Kazuya is turning slaves into government workers, allowing the kingdom to benefit from their talents while improving education. Jian explains that the idea originally came from a slave trader, though the new system has one flaw. People who fail to qualify sometimes become violent after being rejected. Maria's admiration for Kazuya continues to grow. Before leaving to discuss the matter with Hakuya, Jean is teased by Maria about possibly having feelings for him, leaving her embarrassed. Meanwhile, Hakuya reports that the forests around the capital have been heavily cut down, leaving parts of the land barren. Kazuya decides to create laws against excessive logging and plans to replant the area using trees from the Dark Elves' protected forest. When Kazuya asks about Kamane and the refugees, Hakuya explains that resettlement is going well, but many talented refugees still lack suitable jobs. Kazuya proposes expanding Venetonova with new facilities, creating jobs that match their abilities, and improving their education. Hakuya reveals he has already discussed the plan with Ginger Camus. Soon after, Poncho arrives with the sauce Kazuya requested. After tasting it, Kazuya praises it, while Hakuya notices its rich, sweet, and savory flavor. Poncho explains that it combines tomato sauce, Worcestershire sauce, soy sauce, and rice wine. Hakuya suggests making it Venetonova's signature flavor to create new jobs, and Kazuya immediately approves. Later, Kazuya and Lucia enjoy a peaceful, romantic conversation until Carla arrives with a message from King Albert, asking Kazuya to meet him alone the following day. That night, Kazuya meets Albert and Queen Elisha. Albert congratulates him on conquering Amadonia in less than 6 months. Kazuya then asks 3 questions. Why Albert surrendered the throne so easily, why Georg Carmine was so loyal, and why Albert refused to meet him until now. Albert explains that all 3 questions share the same answer. Before responding, he asks whether Kazuya has ever wished he could restart his life and correct his mistakes. He then tells the story of another summoned hero who became prime minister and transformed the kingdom. His success frightened the nobles, who convinced the king to exile him. Soon afterward, neighboring countries invaded while traitors attacked from within. The capital burned for 3 days, the young hero died, and the king was consumed by regret before eventually giving up the throne. Kazuya realizes the story sounds personal, and Albert confirms that he truly witnessed those events through Queen Elisha's magic, foresight, which allowed memories from that failed future to be sent back to their past selves. Elisha also reveals that she chose Albert as her husband because every other future ended in disaster. Following the future Albert's request, they altered history by convincing their past selves to hand the throne to Kazuya. Kazuya struggles to understand the time paradox and realizes this world is far more mysterious than one of simple swords and magic. Albert then reveals that Georg Carmine knew about the future as well, explaining his unwavering loyalty and why he gathered every traitorous noble into one place. Even Castor suspected something was happening, but they could never tell him the truth. Kazuya feels disappointed, believing his achievements had all been prepared in advance. Albert reassures him that many of his greatest accomplishments, especially the annexation of Amadonia, were entirely his own, proving that choosing him as king had been the right decision. When Kazuya asks when history began to change, Elisha explains that this time Lucia remained by his side from the very beginning, just as she had loved and supported him in the failed future. Finally, Kazuya asks about Hakuya and the others. Albert explains that they never joined him in the original future because the broadcast gems were never used. Albert himself had prevented Kazuya from using them because of those responsible for enforcing the laws governing their use. Kazuya finally realizes that using the broadcast gems and discovering talented people were the 2 pivotal decisions that changed everything. None of it would have been possible without his engagement to Lucia, because that was what allowed him to convince the officials responsible for regulating the broadcast gems to let him use them freely. At that moment, he understands that Lucia was the true reason behind their victory. With that, Albert finishes telling him everything. Albert then tells Kazuya that he and Queen Elisha will leave the royal palace and spend the rest of their lives living peacefully in a distant place. He says that he has complete confidence in Kazuya's ability to rule the kingdom and make it far better than ever before. He also entrusts his daughter, Lucia, to him. Kazuya thanks them both and says his farewell. However, just before leaving the room, he stops and asks one final question. He asks whether they ever found his body and Lucia's body in the future where he served as prime minister. Albert replies that Kazuya's body was burned until nothing but ashes remained, but they never discovered what happened to Lucia. Kazuya quietly says that Lucia may still be alive. He adds that he could never have abandoned her without protecting her until his very last breath. The fact that their bodies were never found together might mean that they managed to escape. Albert and Elisha are overjoyed to hear those words, and some of the guilt they have carried for so long finally begins to fade. After that, Kazuya returns to his own palace. Lucia walks over to his side and asks what he discussed with her father. Kazuya tells her that he cannot reveal it. Lucia accepts his answer without hesitation, leaving Kazuya surprised. However, she simply trusts that he will tell her the truth when the right time comes. The atmosphere between them gradually turns romantic. Kazuya tells her that there is something he wants to say to her before he says it to Aisha and Juna. Then, without warning, he confesses his feelings. "I love you." He asks whether she will marry him. Lycia happily accepts his proposal, and fireworks illuminate the night sky behind them. After that, Kazuya and all of his companions gather inside the palace to celebrate the arrival of the new year. Kazuya speaks to each of them one by one, thanking them for everything they have done, and asking every one of them to continue supporting him in their own way. And that, my friend, is how anime ends. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to let us know in the comments. And of course, like and subscribe. Until next time.